Hello, I'm Gabby. Welcome to the Happier Life Project, brought to you by the free award-winning mental health and wellness app, My Possible Self. Shadow work refers to the psychological and emotional process of exploring and integrating the unconscious parts of the self, often referred to as the shadow. The shadow includes traits, desires, and emotions that we deny within ourselves, but often see in others. These can be negative aspects like anger, greed, or envy, but also positive traits that we have not acknowledged, recognised, or cultivated, such as ambition, drive, passion, or confidence. We all have a dark side, it's part of the human experience. But if it is causing us much distress, turmoil, anxiety, or holding us back, or causing conflicts in relationships, friendships, at work, or even on a personal level, shadow work is a very powerful tool for personal development, helping us to live a more balanced and authentic life by embracing all aspects of our being. Concealing your shadow is a form of repression, and experts share that this may have mental health consequences. Rather than addressing what's hurting you, you turn that pain inward and take it out on yourself. Your shadow self can lead to self-destructive behaviours, such as aggressiveness, power struggles, codependency, self-sabotage, addiction, negative talk, or you may experience mental health illness like depression, anxiety, and chronic stress. We all have traits we're not proud of, often created as far back as early childhood, which manifested either consciously or unconsciously. By working with our shadow and recognising and embracing those parts of ourselves, we can live a more fulfilling and happy life. Some of the benefits of shadow work include gaining more confidence and self-esteem, improving your creativity, building better relationships with others, self-acceptance, increasing your compassion towards others, having better clarity, and unshackling yourself from any childhood wounds and programming that are not serving you. Today's guest, Alasdair Kirk, is a counsellor, psychotherapist, certified shadow work facilitator, and psychedelic integration therapist. Ali facilitates shadow work sessions as an effective method of supporting individuals into emotional resilience, authenticity, and joyful living. For Ali, shadow work is a form of deep process psychotherapy. It involves engaging with the shadow, those parts of ourselves that we ignore, repress, deny, fear, or feel ashamed of. These shadow aspects are often the unconscious forces behind our unhelpful behaviours, overwhelming emotions, and troubling life patterns. In this episode of the Happier Life Project, Ali talks brilliantly about how shadow work works, the signs to look out for, that experiences we absorbed from the past that we've consciously or unconsciously banked might be dictating how we behave and feel in the present. Ali goes on to talk about why suppressing your shadow can result in living an inauthentic life, and offers some great advice on how we might begin to meet and embrace our shadow parts to gain a greater sense of personal empowerment, a reduction in internal conflicts or psychological distress, and to free ourselves from living a life less fulfilled. So, ready to find a healthier, happier you? Let's get started. Welcome, Alasdair Kirk, to the Happier Life Project podcast. Now, the listeners will have already heard my solo introduction about you and today's topic. which is shadow work. So this is very new to me, as well as I think maybe quite a few people listening as well. So I'd love to jump straight in. This is taken from your website. The shadow is the unconscious aspect of the personality. It is comprised of all the parts of our wholeness that we ignore, repress, or deny. So I'd love to kind of start there in the simplest way you can, because I know it probably does get quite complex when you start working with people.
Yeah.
But like, what is shadow work?
Good question. So, shadow work for me is a form of embodied psychotherapy, a somatic, experiential way of working with people. And like you've already hinted at, it's called shadow work, is really what it's about, is reclaiming the lost parts of self. The shadow is those aspects of the personality that we ignore, that we repress and we deny. And we all do this for a very good reason as we're growing up. And navigating life in family and culture in the way that we grow up, the institutions that we move through. And it's often the parts of us that are in shadow that are the unconscious drivers behind unhelpful patterns, unhelpful ways of being, overwhelming feeling states, difficult relational things that are happening for us with our partners, with our family. Mm-hmm. And so facilitated shadow work, in the way that I've been trained, it offers a kind of framework for bringing these parts of us and the associated sort of internal dynamics out and visibly alongside the drivers that are driving these unhelpful behaviours and these things that might be on the edge of our awareness or in our unconscious, in a way that we can work with them directly. And in that way, support somebody to move towards working through whatever difficulty or issue that they're bringing. And the movement in this work is always towards a greater level of agency, authenticity, wholeness, integration, whatever you want to call it. Hopefully that is some way of kind of catching what facilitated shadow work is.
Yeah, no, definitely. And my follow-up question was going to be, does everybody that walks on this planet, then humans, do we all have a shadow, or do we have more than one shadow?
That's a good question. I would say that we all have a shadow. The shadow is those parts of us, like I've said, that we ignore and repress and deny. And the opposite of the shadow is our ego, really, the way, our persona, the way that we want to show up in the world, the parts of us that we feel are acceptable, or the way that we want to show up. This is how we choose to be. And the things that we've learned often in our childhood that are unacceptable, which might be things that could be deemed to be unhelpful behaviours. But we can also learn through the same process that our greatness, our power, our agency, our authenticity, our ability to hold great boundaries, that we lose our ability to do this through putting certain emotions into shadow. So your question was, do we all have a shadow? And I can't speak for everybody. I can only speak for myself and the people that I work with. But my experience is that we all have these shadow parts, these parts of us that perhaps we're frightened of, or that we feel shameful about.
So it's our dark side.
Yeah, it can be called our dark side, I guess. These parts of us that are in shadow are outside of our awareness, but they don't just sit there, quietly. They come out in unexpected ways. So it's the problem with us rejecting or exiling parts of ourselves is not just that we don't have access to these capacities, these qualities, but they come out in unexpected ways. They come out, perhaps if our anger is in shadow, because we were told when we were younger that we can't say no, or we can't stand up for ourselves, or we're shamed or put on the naughty step for asserting ourselves. Yeah. Then we learn very quickly, I can't show up like this, and I put my assertiveness into shadow, and then we can find problems further down the road.
I'm just going to piggyback off what you said there. And again, it's on your website. The shadow is often the unconscious driver behind the dissatisfaction, imbalance, disconnection, or lack of fulfillment in our lives and within our relationships, which is basically pretty much what you were just saying then. But it was something that I personally really resonated with, because I think sometimes people can feel a bit off, a bit not right, that something's lacking, a lack of fulfillment. What am I doing with my life? Could this then be these parts that have been suppressed, or like, I don't know, if they're unconscious, if they're sat there unconsciously, it's kind of like if we're feeling like this, then maybe shadow work is something we might benefit from and should think about exploring.
Yeah. So I heard a couple of questions in what you were just saying there.
I tend
Um,
to do that, sorry.
yeah, no, it's fine. How can I answer? Yes, dissatisfaction and existential difficulty. I believe that our psyche is much like our physical body. When we cut ourselves, our physical body wants to move towards wholeness, it wants to heal.
Mm.
And I believe the psyche is the same. So we are injured emotionally as we're growing up, sometimes, not everybody, but
Mm.
that is generally when these impacts happen to us. And I believe that the psyche is consistently seeking healing, and it's often when people get to kind of middle age, they've got everything that they need, they've got a family, they've got support, they've got a job, they've got some kind of sense of security, and it's then that our psyche starts presenting to us these aspects of ourselves, the parts of our wholeness that we are denying, and we start to feel things. We start to feel restless, we feel depressed, we feel directionless, we feel confused, we feel lacking in some way, but we look around and we have everything that we feel that we should need, but
Mm.
there's something inside that's missing, and it's this calling from within that can be the trailhead into the parts of us that we have ignored, or the capacities that we have put in shadow.
Mm.
But the dissatisfaction, all of these things, the pathology, the thoughts we have, the feelings we have, the physical ailments that show up on our body, the backache, whatever it might be, I believe are all trailheads into the subconscious and the parts of us really at the edges of our awareness. And it's these things that if we follow them through the body, that we can start to reach these parts of us that we've exiled.
Wow. I'd love to just go a bit deeper into repression and childhood. And I actually pulled a quote from the founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. Repression is the unconscious blocking of unpleasant emotions, impulses, memories, and thoughts from your conscious mind. The purpose of this defense mechanism is to try to minimize feelings of guilt and anxiety. So, going back to our childhood, then it could be really small things that have left a lasting impact, couldn't it? Like it's usually like behavior that might embarrass the parent, right? Would you say that can show up because we're repressing something that's an authentic part of who we are? And I suppose like maybe picking up the pieces a little bit as, we become older and become more aware. Because I feel like maybe with repression, it could be so subtle that actually we might not even realize it's something that actually we're holding on to an unconscious belief that isn't serving us anymore. Like, for example, I grew up in a very strict Catholic family, particularly my grandparents and my grandma, and she had such strong beliefs about marriage, and it was only over the past few years, I suppose, that I started to unpick some of the things I thought around sex being shameful if it wasn't for procreation, or do you know what I mean? But like it was never like she sat down and had a big talk with me about it, or we had a big fight with me about it. It was just these kind of little signals that I guess I picked up along the way.
You. Yeah. It's not that we learn to put parts of ourselves away, or we learn, for example, the example that you're giving, that sex is shameful, or the body is disgusting, or the way that the body does what it does is distasteful in some way. We don't necessarily learn these by receiving direct communication or explicit, words. We pick up these things by the things that we see happening to other people, or the look that you're given, or the unconscious messages. Our nervous system is picking up so much that's nonverbal. Yeah. And it can be in these nonverbal cues. It's the messages that are hidden within the words that are said, which we pick up, and we can really pick up these messages, like the ones that you're talking about, or that you experience. And when that happens, we learn very quickly. We trade our greatness, this 360-degree personality that we're born with. We start trading this authenticity and who we really are for attachment and for the attention of the people who are important to us. So there's this trading that goes on between who we are authentically and how we have to be loved, to be cared for, to get what we need from our caregivers.
Yeah.
And in terms of repression, going back to what you said, there are parts of us, IFS, internal family systems, as well as the shadow work theory, give a really good lens into how our psyche is kind of structured. And there are parts of us that are groups of feelings, body states, implicit memories, thoughts that are these feeling states. And there are also parts of us which have active roles in our life. And when I hear about repression, I hear about a part of us that is looking out for our safety and is looking out vigilantly for threat. And it's those parts of us that have these specific roles that shut us down, that stop us from thinking, that make us a bit dull in certain situations, or make us go quiet in certain situations when we feel some kind of threat. And it's in that way that our psyche protects us from doing something that we learned once upon a time is distasteful or shameful or is anything like that.
Yeah, the example I gave, you're making me think about, when I got to my teenage years as well and started getting the attention of boys and started developing boobs and all that kind of thing. I do remember now thinking about it, feeling very uncomfortable with the attention. And probably because I was carrying things about it being wrong and it being, but then I went against that when because I was a teenager and wanted to fit in with my friends and do all the things, kissing the boys and, hanging out and, all the things that actually I don't think I was probably ready to do. Yeah. So that was really conflicting.
Yeah, and the thing with these parts of us that have roles, that have learned this role very early in our childhood, is that as an adult, these parts of us, if the individual has not done any deep work around their psyche and really looked at this pattern, these parts of us are still playing out as if mother is still there looking over us, telling us that we're shameful. So we feel like we're not in control, or we feel embarrassed, or we feel shame, even as an adult, when we approach intimate connection or sex or deep relationship. And we don't know why, but we're stuck in some way, or we can't open up, or we're frightened, or something else is going for us in intimacy, because these parts of us that are still protecting us in some way are working from a really old script and they haven't been updated in some way. And what can often happen is other parts of us can pop up, like rebellious parts of us, especially in teenage, to kind of go against these, but that can lead to a real inner conflict. There's a part of us that's wanting to be safe, and there's a part of us that's kind of playing out, and that can lead to internal conflict and other difficulties inside.
I thought it was interesting when I was doing some reading about the not just the kind of repressing the shameful sides, but maybe not putting ourselves forward for things we really want to go for, whether that's a job opportunity or maybe a relationship or whatever. So we're kind of like anchored back to not seize the day and just go for it. And I guess that potentially could be something to do with the past as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like I said earlier, we find ourselves putting parts of us that might be deemed as problematic or wrong in some way into shadow, but also our confidence and our greatness and our power to be magnificent individuals. And so the example that's coming up for me as you share is sort of standing up in class because I know the answer, or feeling like I've got something to give. And I'm with all of this energy because I really want to share, and I've got something to share with the class and to the teacher. And so I stand up and I share what I have to share. And I'm told, sit down, don't be big-headed. Sit down, be quiet. How dare you do that? Wait until you're asked. And so I pick up that message. Okay, it's not okay for me to be exuberant. It's not okay for me to really shine and just share what I have to give. So I learn through these experiences that I have to sit down and I have to hold my tongue and wait my turn. And actually, maybe there's somebody that I see is more important, or somebody that's better than me that has something to say. And so I find myself in social situations, or going for that job, or being in that interview and not shining, because some time before I really heard the message that it was not okay for me to be in this way, and it was impacting, and I felt shame, and I learned to adapt then, but this still plays out for me. So this is a classic thing where
Yeah.
People come to me because they are not living the life they want to live. They're not taking the action that they want to take in their life, or they know what they want to do, but they're stuck in some way.
Mm.
And so this is the beginning of the work for that person.
Is shadow work very similar to like inner child therapy then? Because it sounds like a lot of it is going back and unpicking what we've subconsciously or consciously even picked up or seen as societally acceptable.
Yeah. Inner child therapy can mean lots of different things to me. Shadow work for me, facilitated shadow work, is about finding out who I really am. It's about understanding the parts of me that I know and the parts of me that are on the edges of my awareness and the parts of me that maybe I don't like, so that I can see who I am and I can see and start to experience the conflict that's happening within me, or the parts of me that are in conflict with other people in my life. And I remember a quote that differentiation is an essential step towards wholeness. And what that means for me is that really breaking apart who I am in terms of the parts of me and really seeing that and being able to work with it is the first step towards conflict resolution inside myself, attending to the parts of me that are hurt, that are abandoned, that have been wounded in some way, that need my support, forming a new internal attachment with those parts of myself in order to heal those wounds of childhood, updating the parts of me that are still playing out roles that are no longer helpful for me, but then also looking forward. So there is an element of looking to the past, because it's often the stuff in the past and the impacts of the past, the abuse, the neglect, whatever might have happened, that leads to us not having full capacity or not having access to our full capacity. But then there's very much, shadow work is also about looking forward and growing those aspects of myself that I want to make stronger, the part of me that can lead myself, the part of me that can really connect with my vision for myself, for my family, for my community, and develop these aspects. So for me, there's the looking backwards to heal the wounds of childhood, which could well be inner child work, which is certainly a part of facilitated shadow work. It's a huge part of working with the feeling body and the body in these childlike places. And there's also an element of looking forward for me in this work too.
What made you so passionate and enough to like dedicate most of your work to the shadow?
Because I experienced it. I experienced being facilitated in a way. So when I say facilitated, it's not just talking therapy. There is an embodied nature to it. So the invitation in the work is to embody these parts of self, and when we embody them and speak from these places with a skilled facilitator that can ask the right questions and has the right holding to really support somebody to really connect with this place. Then lots of other thoughts and feelings and internal dynamics and other memories and other people that might be associated with this place inside become available to awareness.
Well, by meeting your shadow, just because you're saying about for how much it sounds like it was a game changer for you.
Yeah.
What actually happens? Is it quite liberating? Do you feel like a weight is off your shoulders? Like what makes it so profound?
What makes it so profound? Because if I speak for myself, I started to realize that I had the capacity to be assertive and to hold boundaries, which I didn't have before, through looking at the internal dynamics and the things that were showing up for myself. There's lots of things that I could talk about personally that I've got. A lot of shame was lifted. I worked through a lot of shame, so I no longer feel the shame that I felt around sexuality and sexual expression and my desire as a man. And the thing about the shadow is that it takes energy, it takes resources, physical resources, emotional resources, to hold these parts of us that we once were told are not okay away. It takes energy to repress these parts of ourselves. And so when we work with our shadow aspects and integrate them, in which can mean lots of different things for different parts and for different people, it could mean healing them, and it could also mean getting these parts of me to a place where I can hold them in a way that I can still walk forward with these parts of me that are still the works in progress. But as I work with the shadow, energy is released, the energy that I've been using, holding these parts of me hidden, is then available for me to use in my life. So there's a greater sense of vitality. There's a greater sense of having the motivation to move forward and take meaningful action in my life, which for me looks like work in the community, working with people, working with men, working with teenage boys, young men, and mentoring them through an organisation that I'm involved in. So for me, there's been a greater capacity to really engage with life in a fuller way.
Mm. Wow, that sounds incredible. It also sounds like it's probably not one session and done.
Yeah.
It takes a bit of time.
Yeah, it takes time. But what happens in the sessions is you're introduced and you're invited into relationship with these parts of yourself. And when you've met a part of yourself, that relationship is there forever. And it's up to you what you do with that relationship when you leave the work or when you leave the session. And we can come back to these relationships, but the shadow work is about inviting somebody to see who they really are, inviting them into relationship with these parts of themselves, and inviting an ongoing relationship for them with all of their aspects in order to move and grow and go forward.
Oh, so if I came to you as a client and I said to you, look, I'm really struggling with jealousy. From what you were saying, that's something that we're not trying to get rid of the jealousy, but we're trying to, I don't know, make it a healthier area of our being.
It's a great question. It's a really great question. We don't want to get rid of any parts of us. I don't believe there are any bad parts of self. There might be parts of us that are playing out in an unhelpful or an unhealthy or a destructive way, but I don't believe any parts of us are bad. And so we become curious about these parts of us, and we become curious about the part of you that is jealous. And we, through the facilitation, invite the part of you that is jealous to be here and dialogue with that part of you to understand more about this part of you. The thing about the parts of us that we don't like is we hear these internal dialogues, and we hear these internal voices, and some of them are ours and authentic, and some of them have come from somewhere else. Some of these voices are our parents, and part of our work is about sifting through the voices and working out which ones are mine and which ones have I taken on from elsewhere. But parts of us, like you're referring to, that maybe are jealous, through dialoguing with these parts and hearing them right the way to the end and you experiencing them, we can start to understand much more about that part of you, why it's doing what it's doing for you. And normally these parts of us, or typically what I find is these parts of us that have roles in our life are often protecting a greater level of vulnerability, a part of us that is feeling something that's very vulnerable, and so the work becomes working with both of these parts of you, both the part of you that, and this is just a guess because I don't know you, but the part of you that is acting out in some way that I sense would probably be some kind of protective strategy that is based some way in your childhood, and there's a part of you that is needing something that hasn't been attended to, so the work becomes
could be something simple as you've got siblings and you didn't get all the attention from your parents.
Could be something really simple. Yeah. And when these internal dynamics, like we're talking about now, are really brought out into the open so they can be worked with and you can see them and you can experience them, the power is taken out of them and you find that you have more control. There's a space between you being jealous that might have been an unconscious thing before. You know it more, you know this part of you, you know what's underneath that part of you. And so there's a greater level of awareness. And in that greater level of awareness, there becomes choice. Okay, I'm feeling that part of me. Do I want to show up like this with this friend of mine? Or can I hold this because I know something about this? And can I show up in a different way? And that's how we start shifting our behaviours.
Can I be happy for them rather than why haven't I got that job or that partner or whatever it is? Yeah. So interesting. I'm surprised there isn't more shadow work therapists, psychotherapists, because it sounds like it's very important work and it sounds like it can be incredibly healing and freeing and liberating. But like when I was trying to, because I only came across the term, I think 1 or 2 years ago, and that was doing a yoga retreat. And then I was like, oh, what's that? And then I sort of started looking into it a little bit. Why do you think it's not more mainstream?
I think how I understand the the development of shadow work. It's been around for quite some time, started in the States
Been hiding in the shadows.
through a guy called Cliff Barry. And it has grown in a group setting. So a bit like family constellation, shadow work has grown in a kind of group container, although there is a lot of one-to-one work too.
Oh, that's
But in the UK, my trainers in Froome, Marianne Hill and Rod Boothroyd, sort of took this training and then turned it into a much greater psychotherapeutic training specifically for working in a very deep psychotherapeutic way with one-to-one with men and women. So my sense is the deepening of the understanding and the deepening of the tools through their development of the program that they now run is creating practitioners who have done a huge amount of their own personal work and has developed this framework, which is a really deep way that's really underpinned by a lot of psychotherapeutic theory. And so my sense is that they are training some really capable practitioners that have done a lot of their own personal work. I work with a lot of psychotherapists and counsellors who have been psychotherapists or counsellors for some time. And I was really surprised that you can become a psychotherapist or counsellor having had some counselling, but not having it done particularly any deep work. And my experience is clients will only go as far as they can sense you've gone to. And so the depth of the work is really limited by where you've gone to in yourself as a practitioner. Yeah, so my sense is that the depth of shadow work, especially one-to-one facilitated shadow work, is perhaps in its early stages in the UK with what Marianne and Rod are doing.
Yeah, you're a pioneer. I'm very curious I took this from a blog post by somebody who's a writer, photographer, filmmaker, podcaster, speaker, and entrepreneur. So she's by no means a mental health expert, but she claims to work at the intersection of the creative process, mindfulness, psychology, and emotional intelligence. And I'm sharing it because she's got quite an extensive list. There are many ways our shadow parts show up in our conscious lives. And this is just to help people sort of think about areas where, could this be something, an echo from the past, So jealousy is the first one, which we've covered. Addiction, depression, anxiety, codependency, creating or being part of a lot of drama in life, self-sabotage, power struggles, lies, procrastination, resentment, passive aggressiveness, bitterness, aggression, anger and rage, violent behaviours and abuse, victimization, guilt and shame, reactive, discontentment. Is she on the money there, Ali?
What was she? There were so many there, I forgot.
I know. You glazed over. No, so she was saying there's many ways our shadow parts show up in our lives.
Yeah.
So if we're struggling with like addiction, I mean, I suppose addiction could be a way of suppressing, couldn't it? And self-soothing. From those parts.
Addiction is a substitute for something authentic. So addiction is a substitute. It's a substance. It's a behaviour. It's a pattern for something that is needed. That is not a need that really is not being met. And I could go on more about that. But your question was actually, are all these things the way the shadow can show up? And yes, simple way to understand what might be in shadow for somebody is those things that we do compulsively, which addiction is one of those things we don't have control over. So things that we find ourselves doing compulsively or automatically really hint at something in shadow that's driving that pattern. And maybe that covers maybe quite a few of those things that you've mentioned. Yeah. And the other thing is those things that we do by accident. We can find ourselves, I can't think of an example, but maybe exploding in rage at our partner because the glass has fallen off the table or something small's happened and we explode in rage and there's this massive outburst. And then we stop and we gather ourselves and we think, hang on, I'm a nice person. I'm relaxed and I believe these different things about myself. What happened there? That wasn't me. I don't know what took over me. Somebody else was in my shoes. Those things that kind of come out in that way that happen kind of by accident or in these explosive outbursts suggest parts of us that are in shadow. And I guess the other way is one thing that we know about the shadow is we really spot and kind of criticize, or we have a really strong emotional reaction to the things that we spot in other people that are in our shadow. So it's called projection. But if we find ourselves judging harshly or really criticizing or having a really strong reaction like disgust or repulsion or something like that to something we see somebody doing, it can be really useful to ask yourself the question, okay, so what in myself am I not owning? You know, what part of me am I not owning that leads to a disproportionate reaction to something I'm seeing in somebody else?
Yeah, wow, that's so interesting. So I found online, this is again online, and I'm just kind of driving home the message. This is a few ways your shadow could be pulling the strings. So I'd love to just kind of get your take on maybe how we could start to break. It sounds like a lot of shadow work is patterns, isn't it? It's like you said, compulsions. It's like that cycle.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe you keep attracting unavailable partners or partners who cheat on you. Should I read them all out first, or just
no? Let's go one at a time. Otherwise,
yeah. No, I thought So you keep going for the unavailable types, the emotionally avoidance, maybe, or partners who cheat on you. So why are we going for that type of person, and how could that potentially be something from the past and away, a shadow?
It's really difficult. There's lots of things that go on for me, and they would just be guesses, and it's really difficult to diagnose without actually working with somebody.
I mean, these are just generic examples online, so
that's, I guess I just want to sort of caveat with that, because until we actually start exploring your parts or this person's parts, I'm just guessing, and sometimes I can be really surprised with what's driving behaviours because it's not what I thought. I am not the best expert to say what's going on for you. It's through the exploration that we both find out what's going on for you.
Okay.
The client is the best expert on themselves, but they don't know what they don't know, and that's where I come in to support them to explore their own interior so that they can find out for themselves what's going on, and then we can work with that. So I don't diagnose. I work with the client to find out together in a curious way. I can answer that but
Yeah, I was going to say maybe that's not a good one because obviously relationships are so complex, aren't they? Romantic ones in particular, that maybe it would be hard.
I mean, what I'm hearing in there is maybe some kind of self-sabotaging behaviour. The parts of us that self-sabotage are parts of us that protect us in some way. So the work would be around exploring that part of them. Also, what I know about trauma theory and working with people that have had severely impacting childhoods is we can shut down our intuitive connection to our gut. We can shut down our feelings, and our gut and our feelings is a powerful place of telling us when things are risky or things aren't okay. So we can find ourselves repeating the same patterns because we're not connected in a real way to our viscera, to our internal intelligence. And so we can find ourselves repeating the same patterns and going into abusive relationships or repeating the same relational patterns because we're shut down in some way and we're not seeing what's happening and we're just blindly going into these places again and again.
Yeah, we can ignore those gut feelings, can't we? Especially when it comes to dating, if we're maybe blinded by some charm and charisma and things. So that's really interesting. This maybe is on the rage side. Maybe you have a friend who is sometimes late and it triggers you out of proportion.
Triggers you out of proportion. I mean, anger is an appropriate response to a boundary being infringed or something not being okay. Anger tells me I'm being mistreated, a boundary is being infringed, I'm worth more than this. And anger is that spark that leads me to take some kind of action, to call it out or to fight or to run away or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So the word you used there was disproportionate. So like I said earlier, I think around anger, when our feelings or our reactions are disproportionate, it suggests that something is in shadow. And when one doesn't have a healthy relationship with our anger, which is an emotion that really serves us and is really important, when we don't have a healthy relationship with anger, then we can either become a pushover and we don't hold boundaries and we don't have boundaries in relationship and we get into those spaces that you were just sort of talking about.
Yeah.
we can't assert ourselves, and maybe we can't say no. Or if we don't have a good relationship with our anger, we can find ourselves responding in over the top ways in the example that you've given. And the reason we're going into an extreme or into a really like a high place or a low place is because we don't allow ourselves to feel the feelings and then take some action. We're pushing it away in some way, so it comes out in these kind of shadowy ways, or these in this example in more of an outburst.
Okay, I'll just do one more. Maybe you feel stuck in areas of your life, and no matter what you do, you don't seem to make any progress.
Yeah.
These were a few examples of how a shadow could be basically pulling the strings and holding us back now from...
Again, I believe we all have the capacity to live full, meaningful, joyful lives that are full of connection, full of purpose, full of meaning. And when that is not happening for us, there is something in the way. And it's either the parts of us that we're ignoring, repressing, denying, we've pushed away, or an impact of childhood, that we create these internal barriers. We take on, and in order to keep these parts of us hidden, we take on ways of being, and we take on beliefs about ourselves so that these parts of us don't come out. And so all of this baggage that we can take on can lead to any of these things that you're sort of talking about. Can lead to us blocking our own path effectively to this whole life that we can be living. And if we can really listen to these messages that we're getting internally, the thoughts, the feelings, what our psyche is trying to tell us, if we can be curious about it and find somebody that can support us to work with this, we can remove these barriers. And I've seen it again and again, people having really powerful sessions, really powerful processes, and really releasing the power that they've been containing in some way for such a long time.
You're making me think. I mean, I'm sold. I'm like, I think I need to do some of this work, honestly. I think probably quite a few people listening will feel the same. But if we wanted to start off slow, ease ourselves in, are there things that we can do by ourselves to start maybe getting into these shadowy spaces?
Yeah, the way that we can inquire, which I already kind of hinted on, is just to check in, sit down, journal. What is it that I have a really extreme reaction to that I spot in other people? What do I disgust about? What am I disgusted about in other people? What brings me to a sense of repulsion from other people? Because that might indicate what's in shadow, and also those ways of being that we don't have control over, that we do compulsively, are a way in. And also, shadow work employs different lenses of how we can view ourselves. And one of the lenses from Jungian psychology is archetypal theory. And over time, Carl Jung, he came up with a dozen or so different archetypal energies, which really are a map and invite us to see the capacity of how we can be as whole human beings. That's how I see archetypal theory. And on my website, there is a web page that I think is entitled Capacities and Archetypes. And there are a simplistic view of the psyche split into 4 archetypal energies. And there's some stuff to read, and there's some sort of questions around these archetypes that reading about these archetypal energies can kind of introduce somebody to what's possible as a whole individual. And when we can see, using this kind of map, what our capacity as an individual could look like, we can start to see maybe where I don't want to use the word lacking, but where we're not living that. And then that can support an inquiry into, okay, so what might be in shadow? What emotion might I have put into shadow? What might I be able to do to reclaim that part of me, that feeling that can support me to really move forward?
Wow. Just one final question before we do the Happier Life Project's last 5 in 5. So to me, everything, and thank you so much for today, everything that you've talked about and taught us, if we're going to go and explore this further and start working with our shadow, it sounds like it would take a lot of courage and bravery, because we're going into parts of ourselves that we don't like, or that we might think, I don't want to feel like that, though. I'm getting into some really uncomfortable sort of sensations in the body. So to anybody listening now that is kind of like conflicted, they're like, I'd love to unshackle myself from some of this weight from the unconscious parts, or maybe the conscious parts as well that I've been suppressing or pushing away, but I'm also scared of going down this rabbit hole. What would you say to them?
I would say to them that we need to feel to heal. And there are no parts of us that are bad, even the parts of an individual that they might, that are acting out in a way that's really destructive for them or for their relationships. I honestly believe that no parts of us are bad. The way that they act out might be bad. So just that's something that I would say. When people generally come, there is a curiosity in them, and there's a kind of excitement about what they might learn about themselves, and there's also a fear. And that fear is welcome. So part of the journey for somebody in shadow work might be starting with the parts of them that are resisting the work, or that are a bit nervous about what they might find or what might happen. And we work with that directly, because these parts of us that are the gatekeepers to our psyche are not going to let anything happen unless they're integrated or brought into the work. Mm-hmm. So I would say, if you feel like you could be living a better life, then there is a way that you can approach that in a slow, gentle way, in a really safe container where we can just titrate. They're in charge of how quickly we go. I'm not in charge of the pace. The client's in charge of the pace, so we just work at their pace and we just move through it at the pace that's right for the client.
Amazing stuff. Okay, it's time for the Happier Life Project's last 5 in 5. The same 5 questions that we ask every guest to wrap up the episode. Are you ready, Ali?
I'm ready.
Okay. When and where are you at your happiest?
I'm at my happiest when I'm deeply connected with myself, and that might be time when I'm with my partner. I'm thinking about time when I'm on my own in nature. Time when I'm circling up with a wonderful group of men in a men's circle that I've been circling up in every 2 weeks around a fire for the last 7 years.
Wow.
Workshops. So the places where I'm really connected with myself is where I'm happiest.
What's your favourite thing to do that nourishes your mental health?
Right now it's breath work. I do that in the morning, and that really resets something. It takes me out of my head straight into my body, makes me feel ready for the day, energized.
What piece of advice do you now know that you wished somebody would have told you earlier that would have made you a happier person?
There's probably quite a lot now, actually. Goodness, I don't know. There's something, if I think about what we've been talking about, there's something about understanding, and this is a bit theoretical, but understanding attachment theory that I won't talk about now really supported me to understand myself in relationship and in my relationship with my partner. And it really supported me to feel less shame about some parts of myself. When I came across it and started applying this theory to myself, I just thought, my goodness, this should be taught in schools. This is part of relationship intelligence. And so I guess I wish I had known something about that when I was, at a younger age, because it would have supported me not to feel so hard on myself for quite a long period of time.
Yeah. What is the most important one thing that needs to change to make the world a happier place?
People need to take more responsibility for their own thoughts, feelings, judgments. This is about reclaiming those shadow parts, because we judge what we can't own in ourselves. And I see so much destruction and these political figures that are not taking responsibility, and that's where things need to start for me.
Okay, final question. What is a simple, actionable first step we can take when it comes to working with our shadow that will help us on our mission to building a happier life?
And I think I covered that kind of earlier, and I think the main one would be, because it's a really great way of inquiring, and I use it all the time, when I'm finding myself responding harshly or judging somebody, just catch it and be curious about it. What is it about me? Where in my life am I doing that very same thing that I'm spotting and criticizing in somebody else?
Yeah. Incredible. Thank you so much. So for more on you, is the best place to go your website to point people to? We'll add this to the show notes as well, but it's inner-truth.co.uk. Do you want me to point to any social media areas as well, or is it website?
The website's the best place, yeah.
Website's best, cool. Fantastic stuff. You've given me a lot of food for thought today. Are you taking more clients?
Yes, there is space at the moment. The way the work works is people come when they want to come, so that I don't sort of schedule lots of sessions. So people come when they're ready, and we work on that basis. So there's always a little bit of space.
Hello friends, it's Gabby back with you. Thank you again to Alasdair Kirk for a really informative and enlightening conversation on shadow work. And thank you to you for listening to this very episode of the Happier Life Project. Just one more minute of your time for the important housekeeping before I say farewell. If you are suffering with your mental health, there is a crisis button on the My Possible Self app, which will signpost you to the correct information for immediate expert advice. Those of you who are listening not on the My Possible Self app, but on one of the podcast platforms, the My Possible Self app is completely free to download and access all of the content, so you don't need to worry about it costing you anything. If you are in crisis or you think you may have an emergency, please do call your doctor or the emergency services immediately. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the interviewer, which is me, and the interviewees. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered as a substitute for professional or medical advice. Our partners at the Priory Healthcare are not involved in the production or content of this podcast. And to find and follow us on social media, we are most active on Instagram at MyPossibleSelf, and I've been at Radio Gabby. Do take care, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.